Democraten. And that is the end of my Dutch vocabulary. But it's an important word. I am delighted to be asked by D66 to come to Amsterdam. Most of you know that, of course, Amsterdam has always been a wonderful place for Americans to visit. I last visited here 45 years ago, and we had a wonderful place, and it's nice to see all the progress. I see, for example, that the Paradiso has now become a respectable music hall. I also want to thank Sophie Inhotveld for her wonderful speech yesterday about the European Union. And I want to speak first about the European Union and then about grassroots politics and how we can win elections. The European Union is a lightning rod for what I call the right-wing parties in our country. That's a very negative thing, because the right-wing parties are always against something. They're against groups, they're against the European Union, they're always against something. They never say what they're for. And it is a pleasure to come before a party who is strong because we are for something. It's always of interest to me when I come to Europe and find that people are upset about things in the European Union. So for an American, I want to tell you why I believe the European Union is the most important experiment in human governance since the founding of the United States 235 years ago. When the United States was founded, now, we are not a perfect country. We don't always live up to our expectations. But the point is, when we were founded, we raised the expectation for the whole world about the relationship between individuals and their government. And we raised the expectation for the whole world for future democratic evolution about the way human beings should treat each other. We had a higher expectation, frankly, based on many of the European philosophers at the time when our Constitution was written. So we raised the expectation about what it meant to be a human being and the value of a human being. 235 years later, what the European Union is doing is extraordinary. You are raising the expectations about how peoples treat each other. What you are doing is attempting to extinguish nationalism and religion as a cause of war on what has been the most violent continent on the face of the earth for 1,000 years. And I'm aware today that the opponents, the anti-European parties, I'm aware that they say, well, we haven't had a war for 70 years. Now we don't need the European Union. What I say is 70 years is a tiny portion of 1,000 years. And I quote George Santayana, who has said, and I'm sure others have said this as well, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. The European Union is an essential institution, not just for the future of Europe, but for the future of mankind. Now, that is not enough. In these difficult economic times, it is not enough simply to talk about high principles. So let us look at some other things. The European Union has created jobs. I want you to imagine if the Netherlands were no longer in the European Union. Do you think that Rotterdam would be the largest port in Europe? Who would you export to? Who would send anything into Rotterdam, knowing that there were now borders that had to be crossed to sell your products elsewhere? The European Union means jobs for the Dutch people. And we do not want to be job killers, as the anti-European party is. The European, I don't want to step on my applause lines here. The European Union has also created economic opportunity. Ironically, because of political considerations, in the UK, for example, there is discussion about immigration from Eastern Europe. I remember what happened when Poland joined the European Union. And many of the continental countries said, no, we have 5 years to keep Polish people out of our country, and we're going to do that. And the British, of all people, said, we will let Polish plumbers come to the United Kingdom. What happened? The British economy went far ahead, much faster than the continental economy. Why? Because as Americans have learned, immigration is good for the economy and it creates jobs, not the opposite. There is a mayor in Pennsylvania who decided it was very good to run against immigrants. You know how this works. Politicians all over the world do this. When you have nothing to say that's positive, you choose some group and point your finger at them and blame them for everything. And that was this man's choice, how he would win re-election as mayor. So they were able to pass some local laws that were later found unconstitutional, that forbade people from renting to people without documentation. This was a small coal mining town in Pennsylvania. And the coal mining industry was in very bad shape, and it was a very poor town, and almost every store in the middle of this town in Pennsylvania was abandoned. The schools were declining because the tax base was getting lower. But before this mayor took office, many Mexican immigrants came to this town, and they opened up the small towns and began to put in bodegas and cafes. And they created an economy, and the economy got stronger. And the day after this mayor passed this legislation, they found somewhere else to go, and the economy of his town collapsed. We understand that there are parties who want nothing but power but have no constructive solutions. Why it is that they would pick out a certain group and aim at them and blame them for everything, as some of the parties are on the right who are blaming immigrants for everything. But the facts are, and the economists will tell you, that immigrants work hard and they build this country, and there are very, very few immigrants on welfare. Most of them are here because they couldn't get an opportunity to work in their home, and now they're going to work it here, and they're going to make us all more prosperous. And that is the truth. It may not be smart politics, but that is the truth. But there are other reasons that the European Union is important, not just for Europeans, but for everybody on the planet. The European Union has the best rules in the world for protecting the environment. The European Union has the highest renewable energy standards in the world. The European Union has the best labor protections in the world. Now, we understand there has to be more flexibility. We understand these things have to change. I am not telling you the European Union is perfect. We should change the European Union. We would be exceptionally foolish, and we would impoverish ourselves if we were to leave the European Union. The European Union has the best environmental regulations, has the best consumer protections in the world. Now, what does this mean? This is a big help to the United States. As you know, we have a party that claims to like a certain beverage in the United States, the Tea Party. They may like tea, but they don't like anybody else or anything else. And we have not been able to pass many of the reforms that President Obama wanted to reform because they refused to pass anything. However, the Chinese manufacturers are still improving their quality because they have to export to the EU. And the standards of the EU are higher than the standards of the United States in these areas that I spoke of. What that means is because of the European Union, you have increased the standards which other countries have to meet, not just for you, a market of 500 million people, but for us and for everybody else around the world, because it makes no sense to manufacture to 2 or 3 standards. You manufacture to the highest standard. So I want to tell Europeans that of course there are bureaucratic problems. Of course we need more transparency. I personally believe that we need direct election of the President and the officership of the European Union. But I will tell you, for those who believe the European Union is no longer necessary, that if you did not have the European Union, I believe the ascension to power of people like Viktor Orban in Hungary would have led to war. But because Hungary is in the European Union, you are able to stop some of the anti-democratic measures that he is taking. That will happen again and again and again. I never want to hear that 70 years later we don't have to worry about war anymore in a continent that practiced war for 1,000 years. We need the European Union. It is not perfect. We have to fix it. We have to reform it. It has to be more transparent. It has to be more efficient. But the European Union is your invention. It is an essential invention. It is something that Europeans can be proud of because you advance the cause of the entire human race as a result of what you have done. Now, speaking of the direct election of European officials, I want to talk about some more local elections on March 19th. This is very, very important, and it's how you build parties. When I took over the Democratic Party in 2004-5, we began something called the 50-state strategy. The 50-state strategy means that our Democratic Party would have a presence and a capacity to win elections in every single state. Now, for those of you who know something about the United States, one might imagine that in Mississippi or Utah or Oklahoma, it might be a very long time before the Democrats ever won anything. But I can remember when Utah had a Democratic governor, when most of the elected officials in Oklahoma were Democratic, and where all the elected officials in Mississippi were Democratic. Things do change. We may take a lesson from Lao Tzu: the longest journey begins with a single step. If you don't run everywhere, not only will you not win the next election, you won't win the election 20 years from now. Essentially, to not be president in an area, whether we're talking about the states or whether we're talking about all the parts of the Netherlands, to not be present is to cede your message and the ability to deliver your message to your opposition. What I told the Democrats is if you don't go to Utah and strengthen the Democratic Party in Utah, you are essentially letting the right-wing talk show host Rush Limbaugh give the Democratic message. So what we did was the state parties were very weak. We put them all in a computer system, which we paid for. We told them they could each hire 5 staff members, which we would pay for. They would choose, but we would get to train several times a year. And we began to win. And I'll tell you how it worked. There's another one of my very favorite sayings. This one, I think, is Louis Pasteur, who says, "Chance favors the prepared mind." Chance favors the prepared mind. You can't know what's going to happen in your life, and you can't know what's going to happen in politics. What you can be is prepared. So in the state of Alaska, which had not elected a Democrat in almost 30 years, there was a young man running who was the mayor of Anchorage, which is half the population of the state, Mark Begich, who is a moderate Democrat, and he had no chance. He was running against Ted Stevens, who was chairman of the Appropriations Committee, had done tremendous amounts of money funneling government money into Alaska, was extremely popular. Mark Begich had no chance. Except that a month before the election, Ted Stevens was indicted for campaign violations. And Ted Stevens insisted on a quick trial, which he was found guilty. And the next senator from Alaska was a young Democrat named Mark Begich. Now, if we had not invested money in the party in Alaska to teach them how to use a computer base to get the vote out, if we had not hired staff that was excellent and understood how they should work and knew someone from every part of Alaska, even a candidate like Mark Begich couldn't have won under those circumstances. That's how Republican Alaska is. So for D66, it is important to be everywhere. I know that money is tight. Money, there's never enough money. There are even people in America who think there's not enough money, that $1.5 billion is not enough money to run a campaign. The point is, money is important. What's more important is people. And if there's any message that comes out of this talk today, it is this. Many people regard me, unjustly, as the father of internet campaigns. The real truth of the matter is, we had a very small campaign with a very strong message, and we drew in thousands of 23-year-olds from all over America. And our genius was not because we knew how to do the internet. Our genius was to step out of the way and let them show us what they knew. And they were the ones that built a nationwide network. But what is most misunderstood about our campaign is people think it was all the internet. We knew how to raise money on the internet. It's true. We knew how to connect people through the internet. It's true. But the internet is not a substitute for personal contact. The internet is a tool to make personal contact easier. The internet is a tool to keep organized in your mind. And in somebody's mind, and the computer is the biggest mind around, the internet is a tool to keep track of where your voters are and who they are. The internet mostly does not persuade people. Sometimes it helps because they may have never heard of you and now they will. But it is a tool to organize. The most important tool still is you. Now, how, even in a smaller country like the Netherlands with only 17 million people, how can you possibly shake everybody's hand? You can't. What you can do is have someone who works with you or a volunteer shake everybody's hand. That should be your goal. One of the things American politicians do is they get a lot of young volunteers or college students, and they knock on every door. They knock on thousands of doors in the last weekend before the campaign. That's all fine and good. I don't advise that. What's much more important is you say to each volunteer, here are 25 neighbors. I would like you to knock on these 25 doors 5 times in the last few months before the campaign. Why is that important? Why does that work? It works, first of all, because that person is likely to know the person whose door they're knocking on. So if a stranger comes to your door and knocks on your door, maybe you want to talk to them, maybe you don't want to be bothered, but if your neighbor knocks on your door or your neighbor's daughter or son knocks on your door, you're probably going to say, what can I do for you? And then if they say, well, I'm from D66 and I wanted to ask you what you thought. You don't go, I'm from D66 and say, and I'm here to tell you why you should vote for the party because it's a wonderful. You say, what are you worried about? D66 is interested in knowing. What concerns do you have? What can we do in our political life to make it better for you? You will get a completely different response than you will to television or the internet or mail or handing stuff out on the street. Neighbor to neighbor. That's what we used to call our program. We use the internet to identify people in people's neighborhoods. We would send them 25 names and say, knock on these 25 people's door. Now, the computer doesn't know everything. Sometimes someone would say, write back and say, well, this is fine, but these 2 people on this list I haven't spoken to for 30 years and our families hate each other. Okay? We send you 2 more names and give those names to somebody else. This is not magic. One person knocking on 25 doors 5 times over the course before the elections. Now, you're going to say next, well, in Europe, we don't have these 2-year election cycles. They may be a few weeks, and even then, the public thinks it's too long. The answer to that is you don't have those election cycles. So there's another concept that we talked about and that we implemented. It's called the permanent campaign. Lucevi said that I was governor for 6 terms. It's true. We had 2-year terms. You're always, people say, isn't that crazy? You're always campaigning. The truth is, if you do your job right, you don't have to worry about campaigning because the campaign takes care of itself. So your job, and I know this is hard in the Netherlands where you have a single unitary list for the whole country, but there's nothing in the law that prevents you from informally saying to all your membership, we're going to divide up into 12 districts and you're going to be responsible for these districts. Even though we know you represent the whole country, we want these people to get to know you. And maybe the next time you're going to have 16 or 20 members, and then you divide up into 20 districts, and you say, we want these people to get to know you. And you should go there frequently. But more importantly, since you can't possibly meet everybody in your district, even certainly not everybody in your country, you have volunteers. The Route 66, the Young Democrats, to go out and talk to these folks. And you're not talking to these folks and telling them why they should vote D66. You're coming to them and asking, what is it that you want us to do? People are always more interested in talking about themselves than they are listening to you, particularly if they know you're a politician. So remember that. Every door is going to get knocked on. Now, over the course of this door knocking, people are going to give you information. You need to keep track of that information. We don't have to spy the way Google does. I remember my wife was typing an email, and she used the word United in the email, and boom comes United Airlines vacation in Hawaii. Google reads your emails while you are typing them. We don't need that kind of spying in politics. You simply have to use the information that people will be willing to give you. If somebody says, I only vote for the conservatives, that's all I ever do, and I'm never going to vote for anybody else, you know what I would do? I would keep knocking on their door. You know why I would keep knocking on their door? Because when you get in government, and when Alexander becomes the prime minister, you're still going to have to govern those people. And it's not just a matter of winning votes, it's also a matter of reducing opposition. It's much harder for people to be angry at you if somebody came to the door 5 days ago and said, what are you worried about? Maybe they'll still keep voting for the conservatives, but they're going to listen to you and they're going to see you in a different light than ever before. So this is really the core message. Local elections matter. Local elections are how the Liberal Democrats in the UK became in government for the first time in 75 years. The UK, as you know, is essentially a 2-party system. Not anymore. I think the Liberal Democrats will be in government the next time, maybe with Labour next time. But they put themselves on the map by winning local elections and governing well and developing a good reputation for good governance. So I want to close by saying thank you for asking me to come. I am sure that I would be a member of D66 if I were a Dutch citizen. I'm very excited about what's happening, both in the March 19th elections and in the European elections. But the real reason I'm very glad I came is because it is very clear that in an atmosphere of negativity about immigration, about the EU, about all these things that really sometimes make European politics look like American politics, where negativity is in the ascent. In that range of all those people who are speaking negatively, D66 is the party of hope. It's the party of the future, not the party of the past. It is not the party of anger, it is the party of courage. That is how you win elections, and you will win this one. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.